He was a billionaire who had everything money could buy, but one day he faced a problem that nearly broke him. Of all people, it was a poor female mechanic, her hands stained with grease, her overalls worn from long days in the sun, who stepped in to help him in his moment of distress. Why would someone with so little risk so much for a stranger who seemed to have everything? And how did that one act of kindness change both their lives forever? Sit back, relax, and watch this story unfold. And if you love tales that show how honesty and kindness can change destinies, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. In the heart of a bustling American city, where the noise of traffic never seems to fade and sirens often cut through the night, lived a young woman named Keisha. She was only 22, but her eyes carried the weight of someone twice her age. Those who passed her on the street saw a slim figure in oil-stained overalls, a bandana knotted tight around her head, her hands rough from years of labor. To most, she looked like any other young mechanic working to survive. But behind those eyes was a story of pain, resilience, and a stubborn hope that refused to die. Keisha hadn't chosen this life. It had chosen her. When she was just 16, her parents were killed in a car accident on a rainy night. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip for weeks, but gossip didn't pay bills, and sympathy didn't raise children. Keisha was left with two younger siblings, Marcus, who was 12, and little Tiana, who was 10. In that moment, childhood ended for Keisha. She had to become both sister and mother, protector and provider, all at once. At first, she tried to keep her siblings afloat with odd jobs. She babysat children for neighbors, scrubbed stairwells in rundown apartment complexes, and spent long afternoons folding clothes at a laundromat. The money was barely enough to keep food on the table, and some nights, when the fridge was empty, Keisha would go without eating so Marcus and Tiana could have something in their stomachs. Yet, even in those dark moments, she never complained. One evening, after another exhausting day of small jobs, Keisha sat on the steps outside their tiny apartment. She stared at her hands, blistered and raw, and whispered to herself, "There's got to be a better way. One day, things will change." It was then that fate nudged her onto a path she never expected. Just a block away, an old mechanic named Mr. Harris ran a small, cluttered workshop. He had known Keisha's father back in the day and had often seen young Keisha walking past. One evening, when Keisha was carrying groceries home, he called out to her, "Girl, you're strong. You ever thought about working with cars?" She frowned, confused. "Cars? I don't know anything about them." He smiled. "Then you'll learn. Tools don't bite." That was the start of everything. At 16, Keisha began hanging around the shop after school, wiping grease off tools, fetching parts, and sweeping the floors. Mr. Harris taught her the basics: how to check oil, change a tire, and identify simple engine problems. At first, people laughed when they saw a skinny teenage girl crawling under cars, her braids brushing against the concrete floor. But Keisha didn't care. Every time she learned something new, every bolt loosened, every engine brought back to life, she felt a spark of pride that kept her going. By the time she was 18, Keisha was no longer just an assistant. She could change brake pads, replace alternators, and even patch up transmissions. The work was grueling. The air smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline, and the sound of grinding metal echoed through her days. Her fingernails were always black with grease no matter how hard she scrubbed, and her lungs often ached from the fumes. Yet, every dollar she earned went toward keeping her siblings fed, clothed, and in school. Life was not kind. Customers sometimes sneered at her, refusing to believe a girl could fix their car. Some laughed outright, asking for the real mechanic. But when Keisha rolled up her sleeves and proved them wrong, their laughter faded into stunned silence. She carried heavy tires on her shoulders, crawled beneath trucks, welded with sparks flying dangerously close to her skin, and pushed herself harder than most men in the shop. She didn't just want to work, she had to. At home, she became the rock of her small family. Marcus often fell asleep at the kitchen table while trying to finish homework, and Tiana clung to Keisha whenever fear crept in during the long, cold nights. They had no parents, no safety net, but they had her. And though Keisha sometimes cried silently into her pillow, wondering how much longer she could keep going, she always rose the next morning, tied her bandana, and headed back to the workshop. Despite the hardship, Keisha never lost her honesty. One afternoon, a wealthy customer accidentally left a thick envelope of cash in the shop after paying for a repair. Some of the younger apprentices whispered that she should keep it. After all, who would know? But Keisha shook her head firmly and marched straight to the customer's car to return it. "Sir, you left this behind." The man stared at her, shocked, before slowly taking it. "You could have kept it," he said quietly. Keisha simply replied, "That's not who I am." It was moments like these that defined her character. Life had beaten her down, but it had never broken her spirit. She was a mechanic by circumstance, but she was a survivor by choice. And even when exhaustion clawed at her bones, she would sometimes pause at the shop's doorway, wipe sweat from her brow, and whisper to herself, "One day, things will change." Keisha's world was one of grease-stained clothes, long hours, and endless sacrifice. To strangers, she was just another struggling young woman in a forgotten neighborhood. But destiny was already moving quietly in the background. She had no idea that her path would soon cross with a man from a world completely different from hers, a billionaire who would see past the grease and the grime to the woman she truly was. And when that moment came, it would not only test her honesty but also change her life in ways she had never dared to dream. Not too far from where Keisha was fighting her way through life, there lived a man whose face often appeared in magazines and whose name was whispered with awe in boardrooms across the country. His name was Adrian Cole. He was 32, tall, calm, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had more than enough. He owned real estate firms in 3 major cities, co-founded a successful tech company, and his portfolio stretched from luxury hotels to digital startups. To the world, Adrian was the picture of success, a billionaire before most men even learned how to manage their first paycheck. But behind the glossy photographs and headlines, Adrian was not the man people thought he was. Yes, he had grown up with wealth. His father, a powerful businessman, had built an empire that Adrian later expanded. From the outside, he was born into privilege. But Adrian never let money define him. His mother, a gentle woman with soft eyes and a warm smile, had planted something different in his heart when he was a boy. She would often sit him down and remind him, "True wealth isn't in your bank account, Adrian. It's in how you treat people." Those words stuck with him. Long after she passed away, they echoed in his mind. And though his life was full of cars, mansions, and boardroom victories, he never forgot the lesson that had shaped him. Yet, wealth came with its own curse. Adrian was surrounded by people, but very few of them were real. Business partners smiled too quickly. Associates shook his hand while planning how to use him. Even in his personal life, women he dated often seemed more in love with his credit cards than with his heart. They dressed beautifully, spoke sweetly, but beneath the surface, Adrian always sensed the same thing: greed, pretense, and shallow admiration. The older he grew, the heavier that emptiness became. His friends from childhood had drifted away, his business associates only wanted deals, and the women who came into his life rarely stayed for reasons that felt genuine. At lavish parties, he often found himself standing alone with a glass in his hand, watching others laugh, and wondering why he felt so disconnected. Adrian longed for something he couldn't buy. He wanted a woman who could see past his wealth, someone who wasn't blinded by his status. He wanted authenticity, kindness, honesty, the qualities his mother had once shown him and urged him to look for in others. But as the years went by, those qualities felt harder and harder to find. He often told himself, "If she loves my pocket, then she doesn't love me. I'd rather stay alone than build my life on lies." Despite the emptiness, Adrian never became bitter. He poured his energy into building his companies, into giving back to his community through quiet philanthropy, and into keeping his private life away from the public eye. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who craved noise or attention. He didn't spend nights in clubs or chase every spotlight. Instead, he valued silence, reflection, and simplicity, rare traits for a man with his level of wealth. But no matter how much he accomplished, something was missing. He would return at night to his sprawling penthouse apartment, the city lights glowing beneath his windows, and feel the ache of solitude. He had cars in the garage, investments on paper, and properties scattered across the country, but not one person who truly understood his heart. He sometimes remembered his mother's voice so clearly it felt like she was in the room with him, True wealth is how you treat people. And he would nod quietly, whispering to himself, "One day, I'll meet someone who sees me, not my money. Someone who treats me like a man, not a wallet." What Adrian didn't know was that destiny was already at work. In just a matter of days, a chance encounter on a lonely road would bring him face to face with someone unlike anyone he had ever met before. A young woman with grease on her hands, resilience in her spirit, and honesty that would cut straight through the walls he had built around his heart. And when that meeting happened, Adrian's life, built on riches, success, and solitude, would never be the same again. The afternoon sun burned hot against the city, the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer and the air feel heavy. Adrian had been driving alone in his black Mercedes, heading back from a land inspection on the outskirts of town. For once, he had chosen not to bring a driver or assistant. He wanted quiet, just him and the open road, far from the constant meetings, emails, and demands of the city. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Halfway down a lonely stretch of highway, the car coughed. At first, Adrian thought it was nothing, maybe just a hiccup. But then the dashboard lit up with angry red signals. He frowned, eased the car toward the shoulder, and within seconds, the powerful engine died completely. He tried restarting it, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The Mercedes sat silent, a glossy, lifeless machine under the blazing sun. Adrian let out a slow breath, frustration crawling into his chest. He glanced around. This part of the road was almost deserted. A few old houses were visible far in the distance, but no shops, no gas stations, no help. He reached for his phone and dialed the roadside assistance service. A robotic voice told him the wait time could be up to an hour. He rubbed his forehead. "Great," he muttered under his breath. He stepped out of the car, loosening his collar. The heat hit him harder outside, wrapping around him like a thick blanket. Sweat began to gather at the back of his neck. He pulled off his jacket, laid it on the hood, and leaned against the car with a sigh. This was not how billionaires were supposed to spend their afternoons, stranded on the side of the road like ordinary people. Adrian's mind drifted back to his mother's words. "True wealth is how you treat people." He chuckled bitterly. "Right now, I'd settle for someone, anyone, to treat me like a person who needs help." Minutes stretched into nearly half an hour. The road remained empty, silent except for the buzzing of cicadas in the grass. Adrian paced, checked his phone, sighed, and shook his head. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. A figure was walking slowly along the edge of the road, heading in his direction. As the figure drew closer, Adrian realized it was a young woman. She wore worn-out boots and dusty overalls smeared with grease. A red bandana held her hair back, and a small tool bag was slung over one shoulder. She walked with purpose, her steps heavy but steady, like someone used to carrying more than her share of burdens. Adrian straightened slightly, cautious. She glanced at him, then at the open hood of the Mercedes, and without hesitation walked closer. "Car trouble?" she asked, her voice clear but casual, as though stranded luxury cars were just another part of the scenery. Adrian studied her. She couldn't have been more than 21 or 22. Grease smudged her cheek. Her hands looked rough from work. She was nothing like the polished assistants and mechanics he normally dealt with. For a moment, he doubted her. Could this young woman possibly know anything about a machine as complicated as his? "Yes," he admitted after a pause. "It just shut down on me. Roadside service says they'll be a while." She nodded, stepping closer to the car. "Mind if I take a look?" Adrian blinked, surprised by her confidence. "You?" he asked before he could stop himself. The woman raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Yeah, me. I fix cars for a living." Something in her tone made him pause. She wasn't bragging. She wasn't begging. She was just stating a fact. Adrian hesitated for another moment, then stepped aside. "Go ahead." She set her tool bag on the ground, tied her bandana tighter, and leaned under the hood. Immediately, her hands moved with practiced ease. She checked the belts, tested the battery connections, and listened closely as she asked him to try the ignition again. The car groaned but refused to start. She frowned, narrowed her eyes, and muttered, "Fuel pump." Within minutes, she had unscrewed a panel, adjusted a loose connection, and tapped the casing firmly with the handle of her wrench. "Try it now," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Adrian climbed into the driver's seat, skeptical but curious. He turned the key. To his surprise, the Mercedes roared back to life, the engine humming smoothly as though nothing had happened. His eyes widened. He stepped out quickly, staring at her in disbelief. You fixed it?" She shrugged, wiping her hands on a rag. "Yeah, it was the pump. Connection was loose. Not a big deal." Adrian shook his head slowly, almost laughing. "Not a big deal. I've seen train technicians take hours to figure that out." She looked up at him, her gaze steady. "Cars don't care how much money you have. They break down the same way." For the first time that afternoon, Adrian smiled. There was something about her calm confidence, her lack of interest in impressing him, that struck a chord deep inside. "What's your name?" he asked. "Keisha," she replied simply, slinging her tool bag back over her shoulder. "Keisha," he repeated softly, as though committing it to memory. "Thank you. You just saved me a long wait and a lot of frustration." She shrugged again, already stepping back onto the road. "No problem. Just doing what I do." Adrian watched her walk away, a strange feeling tugging at his chest. He had met countless people in his life, business partners, politicians, celebrities. But this young mechanic, with her grease-stained hands and quiet humility, had just left an impression stronger than any of them. As the sound of her footsteps faded, Adrian sat back against his car, the engine purring beneath him, and whispered to himself, "There are still genuine people out there. Rare. But real." He didn't know it yet, but that chance meeting on a deserted road was only the beginning. Adrian drove off, but his mind was still on the young woman who had just helped him. For the first time all day, silence felt heavy. He told himself it was nothing, just a stranger, just a good deed. But every few miles he'd catch himself replaying the look on her face, the way she walked away without asking for a thing. And Keisha? By the time she got home, the slip of paper was already buried deep in her pocket, creased and damp with sweat. She didn't think about it. Not really. She had dinner to cook, laundry to sort, a long shift tomorrow. The number sat there, forgotten, as ordinary life rolled on. Neither of them knew how close they had come to staying in touch. One distracted moment, one gust of wind, one pocket thrown into the wash, that's all it takes. The next morning, Adrian woke up with the kind of restlessness that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from unfinished sentences. He showered, dressed down, plain tea, cap low, and told his driver to take the day off. He wanted to drive himself. He started with the obvious. The strip of industrial shops on the south side, the ones with hand-painted signs and old couches out front. He pulled up to Duke's auto, asked if they had a young woman on staff named Keisha. Duke squinted at him through cigarette smoke, shook his head. "Ain't got no Keisha here. You need pads or a pump." Adrian thanked him and left. Mason & Sons was next. 3 bays, one compressor wheezing like an asthma patient. "Keisha," the owner repeated, scratching his jaw. "We had a Kiona 2 summers back. No Keisha." Adrian nodded, scanned the shop anyway, as if she might materialize between the tool chest and the lift. He spent the afternoon doing the same thing. B&B tires, Fix-It Frank, a hole-in-the-wall place under the train tracks that smelled like burned rubber and coffee. Same answer. No Keisha. By evening, the sun slid low, throwing long shadows across cracked concrete. He sat in his car, hands on the wheel, and tried not to feel ridiculous. Billionaires don't drive around chasing strangers. But this didn't feel like chasing. It felt like keeping a promise he hadn't even made yet. Meanwhile, across town, Keisha was working a double morning inspections, afternoon installations. Mr. Harris had finally let her take lead on the bigger jobs. Brake lines, alternators, the occasional transmission that fought back. She liked the way the shop settled into a rhythm, wrenches clicking, radio low, fans pushing warm air. She liked the way problems told on themselves if you listened long enough. But Bills didn't care about rhythm. The past due notice on the kitchen counter glared at her when she got home. 2 months behind on gas and 1 on rent. Marcus had grown into his height overnight and needed sneakers that didn't peel at the toes. Tiana's school trip permission slip was due Friday. Keisha folded the notice in half, then in half again, and slid it beneath the salt shaker like hiding paper could hide pressure. She cooked while the laundry churned, while homework questions floated in from the table. What's a preposition? How do you find slope again? While her own body negotiated with fatigue. When the pot simmered and the shoes were stacked by the door and the kids were laughing at something silly on TV, she allowed herself a minute. Just one. Eyes closed. Head against the cabinet. Then she washed the last pan and set the alarm for 5:15. 2 days later, Adrian stumbled onto a lead. At Carter's Auto and Glass, an older tech remembered a girl. Tiny, tough, bandana always tied tight. Might be the one you talkin' 'bout, he said. She left here last year though. Works somewhere closer to Easton, I think. Easton was a neighborhood, a little rough around the edges and very far from his world. Adrian thanked him and drove there anyway. Easton's main drag was a strip of bodegas, barbershops, and garages with roll-up doors painted in colors that had faded into each other. He eased down the block slowly, reading signs, peeking into open bays. He saw women working, one at the register, one on a stool sorting receipts, but none under a hood. He parked, walked, asked. Heads shook. Shoulders shrugged. Try around Jefferson, someone shouted from a doorway. He tried around Jefferson. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that at that exact hour, Keisha was 10 feet away from him, inside Jefferson Auto, lying on a creeper under a pickup, tapping the fuel line like she was knocking on a door. She heard a car idle outside, deep engine, smooth idle, something expensive. She slid out, wiped her hands, and called to Marcus, who was sweeping the bay for a few bucks after school. Pass me the 10 mil. He ran it over. By the time she sat up, the SUV had pulled off, turned the corner, and was gone. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor. That weekend, Keisha took the bus to Warehouse Mart for bulk groceries. Rice, pasta, the big peanut butter with the red lid. On the way home, traffic tightened into a slow crawl near the underpass. A glossy black SUV rolled beside the bus for a beat. She glanced at it without thinking, the way you notice a bird on a wire and keep moving. Something about the silhouette looked familiar, the slope of the hood, the soft gleam of the paint. She squinted, curious for 1 second too long. Then the bus lurched forward and the SUV slipped behind a delivery truck. She turned back to the window, her breath fogging a small oval on the glass. Focus, she told herself. Rent due Tuesday. Adrian missed her again on Wednesday. He had circled back to Easton, stubborn now, refusing to accept that a city this small could keep 2 people apart. He stopped at a deli for a coffee he didn't want and stood outside sipping it, eyes scanning the sidewalk. Keisha passed half a block away, hoodie up against the wind, a box of brake pads under her arm. He didn't see her. She didn't look up. They moved like 2 rivers running side by side with a strip of land between them. Nights were the worst for both of them. Adrian would come home to quiet rooms and big views, floor-to-ceiling windows spilling city lights onto polished floors. He'd set his keys down, loosen his shoulders, and feel the thud of solitude. He tried to be sensible. People meet and part every day. Not every moment is a sign. He told himself that, then heard his mother's voice again. True wealth is how you treat people. He laughed at himself. I'm trying, Mom, he'd say to an empty room. Hard to treat someone right when I can't even find her. Keisha's nights were smaller, louder, boiling water, a show playing too loud because the remote was missing again, Tiana humming while she braided her hair for school, Marcus dribbling an imaginary ball on the hallway wood because the neighbors complained about the real one. Keisha would clean the counter, check the locks, and lay down with a list in her head. Oil change first thing, call the landlord before noon, ask Mr. Harris about Saturday extra hours, pick up Tiana's workbook, stretch the grocery money. She would think, just for a second, about the man by the road with the kind eyes and the quiet voice, and then she'd push the thought away like a dish she couldn't afford. It went on like this for days that turned into a week, then 2. Almost piled up like loose screws in a coffee can. On Monday, Adrian parked on Jefferson again and walked the block slowly. A kid on a bike rolled past, back wheel squeaking. Music leaked from a barbershop door. At Jefferson Auto, the bay door was down. A handwritten sign read, "Back at 2 o'clock." He checked his watch. 1:47. He waited, telling himself he'd give it 15 minutes and not one more. At 1:58, his office called about a contract that couldn't wait. He stepped away to take the call, pacing, voice low. At 2:03, Keisha ducked under the door with a bag of bolts and a Gatorade, flipped on the lights, and rolled the door up. She slid into the gloom of the bay, unaware that the man she had pulled from the heat 2 weeks earlier was 40 feet away, saying, "Yes, send the updated term sheet," and turning back just in time to see the door already up, shadows swallowing silhouettes. On Thursday, Keisha spotted the black SUV again, this time at a red light on Fulton. She felt it before she saw it, that odd little tug. She leaned forward, peering past the heads and shoulders of strangers, but glare off the windshield hid the driver. The light changed. The SUV turned right. The bus kept straight. She sank back into the plastic seat, half smiling at herself. "Girl, you seeing ghosts now?" Money tightened its grip. The landlord called, voice polite, words sharp. "We've been patient, Ms. Martin. We need a plan by end of week." She said yes, sir, of course, sir, and hung up with her throat hot. She took an extra shift, traded her Saturday off for a few more hours. Marcus offered his stash from after-school sweeping. She took half and told him to keep the rest for a winter coat. Tiana left little notes on the fridge. "You got this, Kuish." Hearts drawn in blue pen. Keisha pressed the notes like they were flowers and kept moving. Adrian tried different tactics. He left his number with 2 shop owners who said they might have seen a girl like that. He tipped a parts driver to ask around. He told himself he wasn't being obsessive. He was being thorough. Then he caught his reflection in a storefront window, cap low, shoulders set, and almost laughed. "You're looking for a person, not closing a deal," he muttered. Still, something wouldn't let him stop. Maybe it was the way she refused his help. Maybe it was the clean line of competence in her hands. Maybe it was the simple fact that she'd shown up on a lonely road and done a kind thing without turning it into a debt. Whatever it was, it kept him looping the same streets, slow, hopeful, a little embarrassed by his own hope. One evening, rain came in thin needles, slicking the asphalt into shine. Keisha locked the shop late, tugging her hood tight, toolbox biting into her palm. She turned the corner just as Adrian's SUV eased past, wipers whispering, headlights painting the wet street in white. She stopped, half a step from the curb, and watched the taillights recede into red threads. He tapped his brakes at the stop sign. The lights flared, then vanished. She stood there another beat, water cooling on her cheeks, then shook it off and kept walking. By the time Friday rolled in, the city felt smaller and somehow bigger at once. They had been close enough to hear the same thunder, smell the same damp pavement, feel the same late bus groan, but not close enough to speak. Destiny, it seemed, wasn't done teasing. It tugged their paths tighter, then loosened them again, like a mechanic testing a belt for slack. One more inch, one more turn, one more day. And somewhere between a shop light flickering back to life and a luxury SUV idling at the curb, both of them, without saying the words, decided they weren't ready to let the moment go. Not yet. The road looked different when you were waiting for someone. Adrian hadn't noticed the crooked mile marker before, the paint flaking from the post like old sunburn. He hadn't noticed the billboard either, some half-peeled ad for a summer festival long gone, smiling faces fading into sky. But on day one, he noticed everything. He parked where his car had died weeks earlier, turned off the engine, and let the heat press against the windows. Morning slid into noon. Noon stretched toward dusk. A few cars passed. A cyclist. A man walking a dog that refused to be hurried. No Keisha. He drove home in a quiet that felt heavier than silence. Day 2, he came back earlier. Dawn cracked the sky open in soft orange. He leaned on the hood, coffee cooling in his hand, and told himself not to feel foolish. Billionaires waited on deals, on approvals, on signatures. They didn't usually wait on gravel shoulders for women they'd met once. And yet, he stayed. A storm rolled through after lunch, thin needles of rain that turned the road slick and wiped the horizon clean. He sat in the SUV, wipers whispering, the rhythm steady, his gaze pinned to the bend where she had appeared that first time like she'd been pulled from the background. The rain ended. The light slanted. No Keisha. Day 3 had wind. It tugged at the grass along the ditch, rattled the old fence that sagged behind the shoulder. Adrian stood outside the car with his cap pulled low. The wind made everything look slightly different, a shifting mirage of the same place. A county truck slowed, the driver leaning out. "You good, sir?" Adrian smiled, lifted a hand. "All good. Waiting on someone." The man nodded like he understood something deeper and rolled on. Adrian stayed until the sun left a long gold smear across the sky, then longer still, because leaving early felt like quitting. When he finally drove off, the road unrolled behind him like a ribbon he was reluctant to let go. Day 4 was the hardest. Not because of the heat or the wind or the long hours of nothing, but because of the small voice that started to nag. What if you made her up? What if you wanted her to be real in a way no one is? He shook his head at his own doubt. He knew her steadiness, the way her hands had moved without asking for permission. Midday, he bought 2 waters from a corner store 3 miles up and handed one to a teenage kid repairing a fence by the field. The boy took it, surprised, and said thanks like it was a word he didn't get to use much. The sun leaned west. A bird settled on the mile marker. The world refused to give him what he wanted. He went home anyway and sat in the dark, city lights blinking from a distance he suddenly disliked. By day 5, the ritual had carved itself into his bones. He arrived before the light, parked in the same spot, and stepped out to the sound of a quiet road waking up. He told himself he would give it until sunset. No speeches to himself, no bargaining. Sunset, then done. The day moved the way days do when you measure them by shadows. The first trucks rumbled by, dust lifting and settling. The heat rose, hummed, then softened. An old sedan pulled over for a while. A woman inside adjusted her headscarf, then drove off. Adrian's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. He let it. He'd already told his office he was unavailable today. They didn't ask why. He rarely had to explain himself, and he wasn't starting now. Late afternoon painted everything in long, warm strokes. The shoulder of the road glowed. The billboard looked briefly brand new. Adrian stood a few feet from the SUV, arms folded, eyes on the bend. He could feel the end of the day coming the way you feel a door closing from the other side of the room. She appeared the way honest things do, without announcement. Just a figure at first, walking along the edge of the road, boots making that soft, dull sound on packed dust. A toolbox swung from her right hand. Bandana tied tight. Shoulders squared, like always. Keisha. His breath left him in a slow, quiet rush. The kind of exhale you don't hear until it's gone. He didn't move. Didn't call out. The world seemed to hold its own breath too. The grass, the light, even the little gnats that jittered over the ditch. Keisha drew closer, not looking up at first. You could tell she'd had a day, the set of her jaw, the tired that doesn't come just from work but from being depended on. She was 20-something and carried herself like someone who had lived enough to know better than to expect easy. When she finally lifted her eyes, they landed on him the way a person recognizes a song after the first 2 notes. She froze. The toolbox eased down, kissed the ground. For a heartbeat, there was nothing between them but a long, shared surprise, hers wide-eyed and still, his soft and grateful. He took a step forward, then another, careful like sudden movement might break the moment. "I thought I lost you forever," he said, voice low, steady with relief. But maybe fate was just waiting for this moment. Keisha blinked like she needed to clear a fog that had arrived without warning. "You're still here." The words came out half laugh, half disbelief. "Every day," he answered simply. No sermon. No flourish. She looked past him at the spot on the shoulder where his car had once died. The memory walked across her face. Steam, heat, the certainty in her hands that day. When she looked back, there was a different kind of caution in her eyes. The caution of someone who's been offered too much by people who meant too little. "I didn't know how to reach you," she admitted. "Your number. It disappeared on me. A small shake of her head. Life gets messy. I figured. He nodded. I tried to find you. Shops, streets, wrong turns. Felt like the city was playing with me. Keisha's mouth softened. It does that sometimes. A breeze slid between them, lifting a corner of the old billboard and laying it down again. Adrian looked at her, really looked. The grease on her knuckles, the small cut near her thumb, the way she stood with weight in both feet like someone who's always braced for the next thing. He felt something settle inside him that hadn't settled in a long time. Keisha, he said, and her name sounded right on his voice. Thank you for that day. You didn't know me. You had places to be. But you stopped. You helped. No strings. I haven't stopped thinking about it. She glanced at the toolbox, then back at him. It was just a car. He shook his head lightly. No. It was the way you did it. Come. Sure. Like the world can be fixed if you listen long enough. He hesitated, then added, and the way you didn't make me owe you for it. Her eyes flickered, not with pride, but with something like relief that the thing she tries to keep pure had been seen clearly. I wasn't raised to take what isn't mine, she said, almost to herself. And I don't like debts. They change people. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. Not to put anything on you. Not to make this heavy. He searched for the right words and found only true ones. I just wanted to say I admire you. Your strength. Your honesty. Not just your skill. Anybody can learn torque specs. Not everybody can do right when nobody's watching. The sun slid lower, dipping toward the tree line, turning her bandana into a thin line of fire. Keisha shifted, the day's ache still in her shoulders, but the guard she wore every waking hour eased a fraction. You waited here 4 days, she asked. 5, he corrected gently, with a small smile that didn't ask for credit. She laughed. Small, surprised, the sound of a tight knot loosening. You know how ridiculous that sounds. I do. He smiled back. But here we are. They stood like that for a while, not filling the air, not rushing the space. Cars passed. A bird landed, decided against it, lifted again. The world resumed its usual business, but the moment didn't flinch. Walk with me, he asked finally, nodding toward the stretch of road where the shoulder widened. No pressure in it. Just an invitation to move the way people do when they're about to share something true. She picked up the toolbox, and he reached for it without thinking. She let him take it, not because she couldn't carry it, but because sometimes letting someone carry the weight is its own act of strength. They walked side by side, steps falling into an easy rhythm that neither of them tried to control. He didn't talk about money. He didn't mention cars or houses or titles. Instead, he asked about her work, what she liked to fix, what fought back, what made a good day. She told him about a stubborn old pickup that sounded wrong for a week before she finally heard the right knock in the right place. She told him about teaching Marcus how to bleed brakes, about Tiana's drawings taped to the fridge, each one labeled in careful block letters. He listened the way people do when they plan to remember. When they reached the old billboard, they stopped. The sunset had pulled the whole sky into warm color. Peach, copper, soft blood orange melting at the edges. Adrian set the toolbox down and turned to her. I don't know where this goes, he said plainly. I'm not here to decide that tonight. I just know you're rare. And if you ever want help, no strings, your terms, say the word. If you don't, I'll still be grateful I met you on a bad day that turned good because you showed up. Keisha met his eyes, unflinching. People say things, she said, not unkindly. They mean them until they don't. That's fair. He nodded. Then let me say this instead. I'll earn whatever trust you give me. Slowly is fine. Something like a smile moved across her face, not flashy, not performative, one of those real smiles that touches the eyes first. Slow, she echoed. I can do slow. They turned back toward the shoulder, the sky deepening, the air taking on that evening cool that makes the day forgive itself. A billionaire and a mechanic, walking the same narrow strip of earth, not because of wealth or need, but because character recognized character and decided to close the distance. Sometimes stories don't begin in ballrooms or on red carpets. Sometimes they start on a quiet road with a crooked mile marker, a toolbox between two people, and the simple agreement to take the next step together. They stood on the shoulder like the world had finally given them a quiet room. Cars passed in long breaths. The sky kept lowering itself into a softer gold. Adrian spoke first, not in the voice he used for deals, but in the one he saved for truths. "I've been looking for you," he said. "Shops, streets, asking the wrong people the right question. I probably looked ridiculous." Keisha's gaze held his for a second, then flicked to the road, then back. "I never thought you'd remember me," she admitted, almost as if she were confessing a small, private hope. "People don't usually remember girls like me. We fix. We disappear. I would have remembered you if I'd only seen you walk by," he said. "But you didn't just fix a car." He paused, searching for the words that would land right. "You did the kind of right thing that's rare where I live. You showed up. You didn't make it a transaction." Keisha let out a tiny breath that could have been a laugh if it had more room. "Where I live, you help if you can. Nobody puts that on a billboard. We just do it." He nodded. "My mother used to tell me, true wealth is how you treat people." He looked out at the road and then back to her. "For a long time I thought I believed that. Then I met you and realized I'd been saying it more than I'd been seeing it." Silence settled again, but not the cold kind. "The kind you can sit in." "I tried to call you," she said quietly. "I had your number, once. Then I didn't. Life does that. Takes things out of your hands when you're not looking." "I figured it wasn't about me," he said. "Phones die. Paper gets lost. The city eats little important things all the time." She tilted her head, studying him. "Most men would have taken it personal." "I'm not most men," he replied without arrogance. Keisha shifted her weight, easing the day's ache out of her knees. "It's strange," she said. "Out here with all this space, I feel like I can finally breathe. In the shop, there's always something. Noise, heat, money chasing me around the room." She half smiled. "Out here, it's just a road." "A road and a mile marker," he said, glancing at the crooked post. "I didn't even notice it till I waited for you." They both smiled at that. He pulled his phone from his pocket and held it out, not in a rush, just practical. "Let's do this the grown way," he said. "You type yours. I'll call so you have mine. No paper. No laundries to swallow it." She hesitated a beat, not because of fear, because she measured things. Then she took the phone and typed. It rang in her pocket. The sound surprised them both. She took her phone out, looked at the screen, then at him. "Guess fate can be simple when it wants to," she said. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it makes you walk 5 days." They stood there longer than strangers usually do, letting a conversation wander without forcing a destination. He asked about the work, what she loved, what she'd change if she had the means. She talked about the way engines talk back if you listen, a high-pitched whine that tells you a belt is lying, a stubborn crank that says the fuel is shy, the clunk you feel in the bones of a car when a joint wants out. She talked about Marcus learning to keep his fingers out of the fan shroud, about Tiana labeling sockets with nail polish so no one would mix up sizes. "And you?" she asked. "What do you do when you're not all this?" She gestured lightly at his calm, his clean lines, the SUV that still looked like it belonged in a magazine. "I build things," he said simply. "Buildings. Systems. Sometimes chances. I'm good at the first two. I'm trying to be better at the last one." "Chances for who?" "For the person who earns them," he said. "Not for the person who asks the loudest." She considered that, then nodded once. "Loud doesn't fix a bolt," she said. "A good hand does." A breeze carried a warm, dusty smell across the road. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and then decided it wasn't worth it. Keisha tucked a flyaway curl back under her bandana. She looked different now than she had when she first walked up. "I'm not easy," she said finally, the words simple and clean. "I don't like attention." I don't like favors I didn't ask for. My life's heavy. I've got 2 kids watching everything I do. He didn't flinch at kids. He knew she meant her siblings. He'd heard their names in the way she carried herself. I don't want to make your load heavier, he said. If anything, I want to make sure the road under your feet isn't breaking while you're carrying everyone. She looked at him for a long second. Trust is not a switch. It is a slow hinge. You could almost hear it move. Then start by seeing it, she said. Where I work. How I work. The roof that leaks over the lift. The compressor that wheezes. See it before you say anything. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow, she agreed. He picked up her toolbox again, but this time he didn't hold it like a gesture. He held it like a promise to bring it back heavier, with the right things inside. They walked back toward the bend. The sun was lower now, washing the road in those last honest colors. At the car, he opened the passenger door and set the box down carefully, as if it were a fragile instrument. Then he turned back to her. Thank you, he said once more, and it was not a repetition. It was a decision. For fixing more than a car. Keisha absorbed it, then gave him a nod that carried more weight than words. Get home safe, she said. We both got mornings. Tomorrow, he echoed, and the word felt like a small bridge that had finally been laid. They left the shoulder in opposite directions, each carrying something the road hadn't taken. Him with a number that meant something, her with a space in her guard where light could get in. And between them, the mile marker leaned in, as if it had been listening the whole time. Morning came with the smell of hot metal and coffee. At Jefferson Auto, the bay door was rolled up halfway, letting a stripe of sun lay across the floor like tape. Fans pushed heavy air in slow circles. A radio hummed something old and warm. Keisha was already there, hair tied up, gloves on, a list in her head. Alternator swap on the Corolla, brake job on the van, diagnosed the mystery rattle that hit itself when customers were listening. Adrian pulled up in a sedan today, nothing flashy, parked a half block away, and walked the rest. He paused at the threshold because thresholds matter. The place smelled like work, rubber, solvent, sweat, time. He took it in the way a good builder takes in a lot before the first line is drawn. Mr. Harris looked up from a workbench, eyes sharp under a brimmed cap. He saw a man in clean shoes standing still in a doorway and didn't like either detail. Can I help you? He asked, polite enough to leave options. I'm here to see Keisha, Adrian said. Mr. Harris's eyebrow did the job his mouth didn't. He called across the bay. Kuish. You got a visitor. Keisha slid out from under a Camry, eye black with grease, smile quick and small when she saw him. You found it, she said. Didn't think Jefferson would make your GPS. I asked the right people the right question finally, he said. She wiped her hands and waved him in. Watch your step. That crack is deeper than it looks. He looked down. The concrete floor was a map of all the years between good enough and we'll fix it next month. Hairline fractures that had become borders. Patches that told stories. An old spill, a dropped gearbox, water tracing the same path every time it rained. Overhead, a tin roof clicked in the heat. One corner showed a stain that meant the leak had a favorite place to land. He kept his hands to himself and his eyes open. He saw the compressor, older than it should be, coughing back to life between bursts. He saw the jack that sagged a little under load, the impact wrench that had to be coaxed into doing its job, the cheap scan tool with a screen you had to hit twice. He saw the way Keisha worked around limitations like they were part of the blueprint. Morning, a teenage voice said. Marcus leaned in from the alley with a sweep broom and sneakers that had been cleaned 2 weeks ago. Hey, Adrian said easily. Marcus nodded back, wary, then gave Keisha the look siblings use. You good? She gave him the look big sisters use. Handle your corner. He started sweeping. A shadow crossed the bay. Tiana peeked in, backpack bouncing. I forgot my notebook, she announced, then froze at the sight of the nice man in the doorway. Oh, hi. Hi, Adrian said, softer than his usual voice. You draw the labels on the sockets? He nodded toward the tool cart where colors bloomed in neat lines. Tiana brightened. So nobody mixes them up, she declared. proud of her system. Keisha smiled without looking up. Saved us 30 minutes a day. That's real money, she said. Tiana grabbed her notebook, gave a little wave, and sprinted out. Marcus smirked. She thinks she runs this shop, he muttered, pleased. Work did not stop for visitors. Keisha slid back under the Camry. You can talk, she said, voice from under the metal. I listen better when my hands are doing something. So he talked, about nothing that would crowd the room. No offers. No promises. He asked how long the compressor had been making that death rattle. Since winter, she said. He asked what she'd fix first if the world let her pick. Roof, she said, rolling out to point at the stain and the electrical box that didn't love water. Then a lift that doesn't stick on the way up. He asked what she wouldn't change. She didn't have to think. The way we treat people. We don't upsell fear here. If a car can go another 6 months, we say that. A customer pulled up, hood smoking. Keisha was there before the car had fully stopped. Pop the hood, she said gently, one hand already on the latch. She moved like a nurse and a mechanic at once. Efficient, respectful, steady. She explained the problem without jargon, offered the cheap fix and the right fix without pushing either. The woman left with a plan and a bill that didn't hurt as much as she expected. Thank you, she told Keisha, for talking to me like I'm not stupid. Keisha shrugged it off. You're not. Adrian caught Mr. Harris watching him watch her. Old men know the difference between curiosity and hunger. Mr. Harris wiped his hands slowly. You from her past or her future? He asked. Hopefully the part that doesn't get in her way, Adrian answered. Mr. Harris said, which in his language meant, we'll see. By noon the heat had settled low. The roof ticked. Water stains told the truth they always tell. Adrian stepped outside for a second to feel the sun without the smell of solvent in it. Easton ran on, barbershop chatter, a bus breaking in long tired sighs, a kid selling cold bottles from a cooler. He looked back into the shop and saw a picture that did not need a caption. Keisha with a torque wrench, Marcus sweeping under the lift, a fan stubbornly trying its best. It moved something deep in him that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with respect. He came back in. Can I take you all to lunch? He asked, light. No fancy place. Just food that lets you keep working. Keisha shook her head, already reaching for a socket. Appreciate it. We eat here. Saves time, saves money. She nodded toward a small microwave and a cooler packed with leftovers and sandwiches. We good. He didn't push. He didn't switch to money. He just stayed. He held a panel when 2 hands weren't enough. He fetched a part from the counter and didn't get in the way. He listened to Mr. Harris tell a story about a Chevelle that could outrun regret and to Marcus argue that the Bulls would be back if management stopped pretending patience was a plan. At some point, the roof made the sound roofs make right before they remember a leak. A thin line of brown traced its way down the wall toward an outlet. Keisha was already moving, unplugging the charger, dragging a pan into place. No drama. Just one more thing to carry. Adrian felt the decision settle, not as impulse, but as architecture, a design he could see in plain lines. When the afternoon cooled, he stepped to the doorway again. Thank you for letting me see, he said. I didn't want to talk before I understood. She wiped her hands, met his eyes. And now that you've seen, I'll keep showing up, he said. In the ways that don't make you sorry you let me in. Slow, she reminded. Slow, he said back. He left with nothing in his hands and everything he needed. Keisha watched him go, then turned to the Corolla like time hadn't paused at all. The wrench clicked. The shop breathed. The stain on the wall didn't stop being a stain. But the room felt a degree lighter, as if someone had opened a vent no one could find before. That evening, when Marcus set the table and Tiana drew little hearts around the week's to-do list, Keisha didn't say much about the visitor. She didn't need to. The kids had eyes. They'd seen the way he looked at the crack in the floor, the leak, the tools that should have retired. They'd seen that he saw. And sometimes being seen is the first good thing that happens to a place in a long time. The repairs began the way good changes do, quietly, with no speeches. 2 mornings later, A roofing crew rolled up at 7:15 with new panels and sealant. They asked for Keisha Martin. She blinked. That's me. Paperwork had her name at the top. Paid in full. No company logo she recognized. No note demanding credit. Just authorization and a schedule that said finish today. By noon, the stain on the wall had lost its power. Rain could come now and keep its opinion to itself. The following day, an electrician arrived with permits and a coil of clean conduit. He tidied the spaghetti into lines, moved outlets away from the splash zone, brought the lights up so the corners didn't look like places where tools went to vanish. He labeled boxes the way Tiana labeled sockets. When he left, the switch clicked with dignity. On Friday, a delivery truck backed up to the bay and beeped in slow confidence. Two men wheeled out crates, a two-post lift with honest hydraulics, a 60-gallon compressor that breathed like a runner, a torque wrench set that clicked when it should, a midline scan tool with a screen that didn't need persuasion, and drawers that slid like decisions made on time. The invoice showed recipient, Jefferson Auto, attention, Keisha, and payer, on file. Mr. Harris looked at the papers, then at Keisha, then at the ceiling like answers might be written there. You know who did this? He asked. Keisha did. But she also knew another thing. Gifts feel different when they carry a label you didn't ask for. These didn't. They sat there like respect you could plug in. When the compressor kicked on, the sound made everyone in the shop go still for a second. It was strong and even, a heartbeat you could trust. Marcus laughed out loud without meaning to. Tiana clapped when the lift took the van up smooth. No stutter. Keisha ran her hand along the lift's column, fingertips catching the tiny ridges in the paint. Her throat felt tight for reasons that had nothing to do with money. It wasn't the equipment. It was what the equipment said. She stepped outside and dialed the number she now had memorized. He answered on the second ring. Keisha. You did it quiet, she said. Here is better when quiet does the work, he said. No plaques. No posts. This isn't charity, she said. Not a question, a boundary. No, he said. It's recognition. You gave me something money can't buy. Trust. Let me give you back what you deserve. A chance. The rest is yours. Wind moved down the block, carrying a smell like clean metal and new paint. Keisha closed her eyes for half a second, the way people do when a knot loosens in a place they've been carrying for years. Thank you, she said, and the words were not small. They were exact. Come by tomorrow. See it working. I'd like that, he said. She hung up, went back inside, and rolled a car onto the new lift. The shop rose with it. Literal, actual, felt. Sometimes fate doesn't change the road under your feet. Sometimes it gives you better shoes. 3 days later, Keisha wiped her hands, straightened her coveralls, and told Mr. Harris she'd be back by noon. Where you going? He asked, still pretending not to know. To say thank you the right way, she said, and grabbed the bus. Adrian's office sat high enough to see a clean line of river and a quilt of roofs. The lobby was glass and green plants and quiet footsteps. Keisha felt the usual tightness that comes when you enter rooms that weren't built with you in mind. She kept walking anyway. The receptionist looked up. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? I have a name, Keisha said, gentle but certain. She gave it. The receptionist's face changed in that quick way faces do when a script shifts. One moment. A call. A nod. He'll see you. Adrian stepped out himself. No assistant buffer. No delay. He took in the oil on her knuckles, the little burn near her wrist, the way she stood like she didn't owe the room anything. His expression softened in a way meetings never got to see. You came, he said. I did, she answered. To say thank you. Not on the phone. Not from the door. Proper. They sat in a small conference room with a view that made everything below look organized. He poured water, not as a gesture, but because there were two people in a room and water belongs between them. I've had people show up here with lists, he said lightly. You brought none. I brought a shop that doesn't leak, she said. And a promise I won't waste what you gave. That's more than enough. She told him what the new lift had solved, how the compressor shaved minutes off jobs, which is another way to say money. She told him Marcus had learned to set the locks on the lift and check twice. She told him Tiana's socket labels had moved to the new drawers like they'd always belonged. He listened with the kind of attention that makes a person stand a little taller just telling the story. Somewhere in the middle of a sentence about brake lines and proper torque, he realized the thing he had suspected on the road was true in a room. She was exactly what he had been looking for without knowing how to ask. Genuine. Strong. Unshaken by wealth. Or by the lack of it. I want to take you to lunch, he said, where the napkins aren't paper but the food still tastes like somebody's grandmother cooked it. She smiled. I'll go if we can be back by 2. Mr. Harris gets nervous if I'm not where I belong when the rush hits. 2, he agreed. They ate at a diner that had been there long enough to see haircuts come and go. He didn't perform. She didn't audition. They talked like people who decided to use real words. When he walked her back to the bus stop, he didn't offer a car, a driver, a shortcut. He offered something rarer. Patience. Slow, he said again, as the bus hissed to a stop. Slow, she echoed, stepping up. The doors closed. He watched the bus pull away, then turned toward a skyline that had never felt less empty. Above him, glass caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like a promise kept. Morning finds Jefferson Auto wide open and bright. The new roof holds the light, the fans push clean air, and the compressor hums like a promise kept. The lift rises smooth. No stutter, no prayer under breath. Keisha moves through the bay with a different weight in her steps. Not lighter because life got easy. Lighter because it finally stopped fighting her at every turn. She ties her bandana, checks the order board, and calls it like a foreman. Marcus, set the locks and torque the lugs. Check twice. Got you, he says, grinning, already 2 steps ahead. Tiana, inventory the brake kits. Use your labels. On it, she beams, sliding open drawers that no longer stick. A minivan rolls in with a rattle. Keisha meets the customer at the hood and explains the fix without fear talk, without upsell. The woman nods, relieved to be treated like a partner, not a mark. Keisha's hands move sure and steady, the kind of confidence that grows only where honesty and skill are both welcome. By mid-morning, Adrian steps in, plain shirt, sleeves rolled, a cardboard tray of coffees balanced in one hand. No entourage. No announcement. He nods to Mr. Harris, who returns it with the quiet respect older men keep for those who earn it. Adrian doesn't hover. He helps. He holds a panel when 2 hands aren't enough, steadies a bumper while Keisha aligns clips, listens more than he speaks. If anyone here still thinks billionaire, he gives them nothing to hold on to but character. It rains just after noon, the first good test since the repairs. Everyone stops for half a breath, listening for the familiar drip that used to send them scrambling. Nothing. Only the clean patter on the paneled roof. Keisha glances up, then back to her work, a smile tugging before she can hide it. Tiana laughs at something her sister says, really laughs, the kind that shows all her teeth. Marcus shakes his head like he's trying not to smile and fails anyway. They see her, Keisha actually laughing, shoulders loose, face open, and it lands in them like daylight. For the first time in years, home won't have to start with, I'm sorry, we'll figure it out. Between jobs, Keisha wipes her hands and leans on the fender. Adrian is there, not to rescue, not to perform, just to be present. He watches the way she runs her small empire. Firm, fair, precise. He learns the rhythm of her day and lets his fall in step with it. When the last car drops off the lift and the floor gets swept, Keisha flips the switch on the wall. Lights tick down. The shop breathes out. She steps outside with Marcus and Tiana, and in the soft evening, the block feels different. Still the same street, but now it meets them halfway. Adrian joins them at the curb. No speeches. No futures drawn in neon. Just a look that says slow still means forward. Sometimes love doesn't begin in ballrooms or penthouses. Sometimes it starts with a broken-down car, a pair of greasy hands, and a heart too honest to look away. What do you think about Adrian and Keisha's story? Would you have helped a stranger the way she did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more tales that prove honesty and kindness can still change destinies.